All right, Eric and Bob, thank you for jumping on. This is such a critical and important topic, and obviously one that's really personal for me. So I'm excited you're both here today. I'm sure most of the people in my universe know who you are, but if you both can give a quick introduction, we'll start with Eric.
Yeah, sure. So Eric Kussin, I'm the founder of an organization called We're All a Little Crazy, which is the same here global mental health movement. Spent 15 years working at the NBA league office and then for a number of NBA teams and NHL teams. Had my own crazy life experience that we'll hear a little bit about as we go on, and decided to switch my focus for my passion for the rest of my life and work on mental health advocacy. So thanks, Brett. Awesome for you bringing us all together.
Awesome, Bob.
Yeah, no, I'll echo what Eric said. I appreciate, Brett, appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's going to be I've been looking forward to this conversation. So thanks for bringing us all together to have it. My name is Bob Hamer. I'm the president and founder of Sports Business Solutions. We are a little bit of a hybrid sports business consulting group. We do some sales training, a lot of consulting for sports teams, sports properties, really all over. A lot of teams in the States, have a couple Canadian partners. And so, Brett, similar to you and what you do. I guess our passion is, as a company, we really enjoy helping people be successful in the sports business. And I know Brett and I share that in common. Prior to Sports Business Solutions, I spent 8 years at the Phoenix Suns. Eric, who's on the call, was my boss back in the day. So I'll be sure to give him a hard time a little bit as we go. But my tenure at the Suns, pretty straightforward. I got into a sales role and grew up the ranks there. So went from inside sales to an account executive, senior AE, and over time became their VP of ticketing. So oversaw parts of the ticket sales business before leaving in 2014 to start Sports Business Solutions, and been doing that ever since. So thanks for having me, Brett.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited for both of you to be here today, and maybe Bob and Eric, if you can take just a couple seconds right now to talk about this group that we're all a part of, but obviously you guys are really leading. Same Here Solutions, something that I'm incredibly excited about being able to contribute to, and something I think is really important for the industry.
Yeah, I think.
Eric,
Yeah,
let me give a little bit of color to maybe the clubhouse and sort of how this all fits in, and then I'd love to have you expand on sort of how this all came to be, if that works. Might be a little easier.
yeah.
Through our business, Sports Business Solutions, we created for lack of a better term, an educational content hub in sports business called the Clubhouse. And so we have a lot of our blogs are there, a lot of our video content's there, a lot of our educational materials, mentorship, job boards, all that kind of stuff. Really, the vision behind that was to help more people in sports be successful and try to bring as much educational value to that space as we could. And so a lot of it in there is very tactical. It's focused on, training, and it's very specific to, whether it's getting a job or growing your career. There's a ton of resources in there. But I felt like the one piece that was missing within that environment was this conversation about mental health. We talk about how we can help people, hit their sales targets and those sorts of things. But I think, we didn't really have sort of a mental health component and a way to help people in that space. We'll get into probably my story and Eric's and Brett, yours as well, around how mental health has all affected us. But I've always wanted to have that be sort of a piece of our portfolio, because I feel like there's a lot of people in the industry that, need some help in that area. And so I didn't have sort of as much of a background with it as Eric did. And so when Eric and I, just because of our relationship, and we've been good friends for a long time, and as I mentioned, he was my boss, I watched what he was doing from afar and what he's been able to build through the Same Here global mental health movement. I was going through some personal struggles with it. And so we kind of came back together, and he's done so well with that community, the community he's built. I just thought there'd be a great opportunity to take some of those things and bring them to the sports industry and have it live within our clubhouse environment. And so that's kind of the genesis of sort of how it came to be on my end. But Eric, I guess maybe from your perspective too, how did, maybe expand on what I said and maybe talk about the importance of it in the sports business community specifically.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think of mental health, and I don't think of it in terms of how most people think of mental health. I think of mental health as life, right? What are the challenges we all go through? And, I think before we hopped on this call, the three of us were joking around a little bit about it is, we didn't want this podcast to seem like an interview, because it's not. Like it really feels like camaraderie amongst the three of us, which is so fun and awesome. and a way to give back. I don't, from a monetization standpoint, none of us are doing this because of anything related to that. We're doing it because it's a topic that we love to discuss. So a little bit of background there is, the Bob joking about, being on my team with the Suns. Bob used to love driving to lunch when we would go out to lunches, and maybe that's our good work-life balance there, that we actually took lunches when we were with the Suns. So he had his Nissan Altima, and I used to watch him go back and check his car like a number of times to make sure it was locked. And I thought it was funny more than anything because I have a father who I didn't know at the time what it was, but has OCD and checks everything a million times. But my dad probably wouldn't love being of that generation that I'm sharing that publicly. But so I used to say to Bob, you're like a miniature version of my dad, and give him like a hard time about it. Then you fast forward in 2015, beginning of 2015, I go through my own crash that's related to mental health, that's related to what I find out is more life experience related things that had happened to me with my brother getting sick and friends passing away that had built up inside my system and kind of took me crashing down. That didn't seem like it was much anything genetics related and was more about the life experiences that I experienced over time. And so, obviously the last thing I was thinking about during that 2.5-year period when I was going through that was, what kind of organization am I starting? I was just trying to survive day by day. And I come back and start this organization the end of 2017, beginning of 2018. And, when I shared my story, which was towards the middle of 2017, there was really no template for sharing at that time. There was no Kevin Love story or DeMar DeRozan story. Or Players Tribune in general sharing these types of stories. So I kind of just wrote it out in a Word document and put it up before there were character limits on LinkedIn and this whole long document. And now coming full circle, the interesting thing is Bob, reaching out to me, seeing what I had been building, and then us kind of deciding that it made sense to do something, from a professional courtesy standpoint. And sometimes these conversations are uncomfortable, but I think between the three of us, you almost can have the conversation on the up and up because we're doing stuff together right now. Is I knew that Brett had been so open about sharing his own story and how important this topic was to him. And so, Brett was one of the calls that I made. Another guy that I called, be transparent about, is the guy, Dan Rossetti, only because when he was working with Prodigy, he had asked me to do a couple of pieces for their newsletter as well. I just want to make sure, hey, listen, this is something that we're going down the path of. What do you think about this idea of creating a hub where sports business executives can hear about life, again, not hear about mental health, hear about our life challenges and the common things that we all face. And to Brett's credit, I encouraged Brett and Bob to have a conversation separately about it. You guys got together and talked about it. And I think what's unique about what's being created here, and then I'll stop talking, is that you think of the Teambo model, and I was fortunate enough to be part of the early phases of that when Bernie Mullen, was the godfather of Teambo back in the day, and loved working for that guy, and figuring out a way to get the teams that maybe thought of each other as competitors, even though they were in completely different markets where you were bound to your 75-mile radius, started sharing ideas. And then it became, of course, we should share ideas, right? Well, this is almost like, now can you take that Teambo concept and not just do it within a league, but do it across all the leagues, MLS all the way to the NFL, all the way, even I'm sure we're going to start to get folks from overseas, from Premier League, especially Brett, with a lot of your soccer contacts, football. Sure. But to think of this as like, why don't more industries do this? Why is it just about the company? Why is it just about the league? What it should be is, I'm thinking about it from a player perspective. Anthony Davis should be able to talk to Damian Lillard, even if it's through an anonymous source. So think of our executives as, there's an Anthony Davis out there, there's a Damian Lillard out there, different points of their careers, different markets. That doesn't mean they can't talk and share information about the stuff that they go through. And so that's what I think is special about what's been created here, is that we all have stories, we all have challenges we've been through, and the three of us, the fun thing is, we're willing to be open and share it, and hopefully that leads towards more and more sharing from everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it's funny. I've got a couple side eyes and side comments from people like, really, you're gonna team with Bob right now for this? And I think the answer was, there's a few things. First off, I mean, Bob knows this. We promoted each other's content for a while. Like, I've been publicly supportive of the Clubhouse, period, because I think people that make a real effort to elevate this community and sports reps and give them what's a really tough job, an outlet to be able to make connections and find solutions, is really, really important. And obviously this one's even easier because, and it's easier to contribute directly to it because, to Eric's point, like, this is something that has affected all three of us. It's something we are particularly passionate about. And one that I think is way more of a problem in this industry than I think people are starting to have that discussion, and I think it's starting to become a more positive place. But it's sales is a tough job, period. And then when you add in, most organizations that have sales programs, I started my career at CEB, we didn't have 41 game nights a year that we were responsible to do that. And we weren't responsible for community events on the weekends. There are added pressures to an already pressure packed job that just is supremely challenging in this environment. And I know the amount that I've received back, and I know Eric, compliments to you. Like, I don't know how open I would have been to share my story, had it not been for you to be so public about it to start. And, I still, even then, it took me, I think, 3 or 4 months to hit send on the article I had in LinkedIn. It was in my LinkedIn drafts for a really long time, because it's a challenging topic to be able to say, yes, this is something I struggle with, and have struggled with and continue to struggle with. And so it's cool to be able to create an environment that this is going to be housed in. And Bob, if you want to talk real quickly about, specifically what we're going to see from this moving forward, and what are some of the topics and what are some of the formats it's going to be delivered in, because we've already had some, which has been awesome.
Yeah, so I think there's a few different ways we're going to deliver content. So we're going to do regular webinars, which are educational, open to anyone, everyone. What was important to us, throughout, is that all the blogs, all the webinars, all the recordings, always going to be free through our platform. And so we want to get as much of that out to as many people as possible. So you'll see webinars, probably 1 a month. Eric, I'm sure you'd agree. I mean, we kind of look for that, maybe 2 a month, depending. So we're going to have the webinars. We're going to have the blog, which is going to take a couple different shapes. I think one part of the blog is going to be storytelling. So individuals that have, been affected by mental health, or that are struggling with certain things in their life, professionally, personally, we want to be a platform to help those individuals tell their stories. And Eric and I sort of took the lead. Eric first, Brett was out publicly with his story before I was. I wrote my story up for the site, and Brett, kind of like you, I haven't fully sent it yet. I mean, it's on there, but I think at some point I need to get mine out there. But I think, in a way that, not to say that this is like the Players Tribune, but, the Players Tribune has been sort of the voice of the athlete. And I always look at the storytelling here in this space as like, I want to give people a platform to talk about their stories in a very open and authentic way. And so I think you'll see those on the blog. You'll also see some practical takeaways and some, Eric calls them life hacks, things that people can do if they're struggling with certain things. So you'll see some of that in the blog. And then a piece that I'm excited about that I haven't really seen anywhere else is we have a discussion board on the page to where it's totally anonymous. So people can go and they can ask a question. The community can go and offer a response, both anonymously. And we're going to use that as a way to try to derive some additional content as well, because we really want people to contribute to the site. We want people to come together, and we're hopeful that the more people participate, the more that write their blogs, the more that come out like Brett and Eric and tell their stories, it will become a more normal conversation versus what it is now, when a lot of us are sort of operating in the shadows. We want to sort of bring those people out to the limelight. And I think as we continue to build this out, there's a couple subjects that we're going to cover, and I think Eric brought up a good point. You don't need, and he always says this, and I agree, you don't need to put a label on it. Like for me, I have OCD. I was, clinically diagnosed with it, and that's the thing that I work on with my mental health. But a lot of people have stress. A lot of people have anxiety. Some people might have depression. Eric has mentioned his PTSD. There's all these different sort of terms out there. But I think one thing's consistent, and Eric always messages 5 and 5, which I agree with too, is that we all, whether you have a label on it or not, we all have struggles in our personal and professional lives. And so we're going to tackle some subjects in our space through Same Here Solutions, through the Clubhouse. Brett's going to be a contributor there as well. And some things that are happening, like, how do you manage work and life? How do you be a good parent and also be a successful sports business industry exec? And how could you be a good spouse? And how do you sort of manage that dynamic? How do you manage a heavy travel schedule? How do you manage, I know one for me that wasn't always easy to talk about was like, when you're a senior leader at a team, you're on stage all day, all the time. Brett and Eric, you both can agree. You get called in by the owner in front of the senior leadership team, and you got to be on demand and on your game all the time on the weekend. And like, that was really stressful for me. And so like, how do we put that out there and talk about, like, how do you live in that spotlight and be comfortable? So I think that's a subject that I'm excited to tackle. We have some representation through the platform. I believe it's Chris, Brett, who had sort of recommended to the platform, that's going to contribute, who has more on the player operations side within soccer, who's going to maybe talk about the influence within the player community and maybe how that plays into it. Eric, there's probably a few subjects that I'm missing, but those are just some of the ones that are coming to mind. Oh, the other one was like, if you're a leader, how do you create an environment where your people feel comfortable coming to you and sharing? How do you have that environment of trust and that openness? And how do you make your team members feel secure if they are struggling with their mental health? And so what you'll see with a lot of the subjects that we tackle is it's not specifically like, hey, how do you deal with OCD? To Eric's point, it's like, how you deal with life. Is that fair, Eric?
Yeah, well, life is because, if we did a webinar or a podcast on OCD, the people who've been diagnosed with OCD or think that OCD is what's affected them are the people who tune into that. And it's a very niche conversation. And it's not that it's not important. It wouldn't, I don't think, impact as many people. And I don't think we're at a place yet in any industry. And what I'm excited about with this is I liaise between different industries all the time. I work with schools. I work with, first responder community. The connectivity that we have as a group, the other people who've been involved with what we're doing from a leadership perspective, Drew Cloud doing it from a search standpoint, right? And he's been a senior leader at teams himself. And then like a Danny Fagan, who's on the sponsorship side of things, an entry level type of spot.
By the way, real quick, Danny and I just figured out that we went to the same college. Same small
crazy.
college in Central New York.
Which was like that call that we had where it was awesome. We were connecting with each other. But the different people who are involved here, we've got this way through different levels to bring this conversation to one another in a way that hasn't been done before. And what I mean by to one another is I think it's going to take place differently at each organization, how we affect each organization for this reason. You're going to have some organizations where there's resistance from the top in terms of them opening up and their willingness to be vulnerable, right? So Bob and I, when we were at the Suns, we worked for Rick Welts. Look how open Rick Welts has been about a life subject, right? About coming out as being a gay man working in sports. That took a certain level of vulnerability in order to do that, right? So you'd think there's more of an openness. I know Jared Schoenfeld, who's now working for Chopra, for that organization, has spoken with Rick about opening up and sharing more and being more vulnerable. So you're going to have that level. And Brett, what you were sharing about, like, some of the struggles that all, we deal with in this industry, let's be fair about it. Some of the struggles are because what we've placed an emphasis on from a leadership perspective, and Bob talked about it then when he talked about one of the subjects that we discuss about being on all the time, is that there's this perception that what a leader in sports is someone who's incapable of error. Like Teflon Don, like everything is smooth. They know how to answer everything. Well, they have a personal life also. And no matter how they look on stage, they go through challenges too. And maybe they're not as open about that. So I think what's going to be fascinating is there going to be an uprising where some of the newer folks coming into the industry, it becomes more normalized for us to share our stories the way the three of us have? Is it a groundswell from above, from below? Or do we have some of the more senior leaders in our industry, the Chad Esseses of the world and people like that? Or I saw him on a podcast recently where he was sharing a little bit of his vulnerability. And so you could look at it both ways, is that if we're collaborating as an industry, it's exciting that it can happen from two different places. And we could be one of, if not the first industry out there in business that talks about this so openly and comes together. I think that's what's exciting about what the future holds.
And what's been interesting for me, and I think in a lot of ways, what I like about this is the collective nature of it. Not necessarily you have OCD, you have PTSD, I have anxiety, because a lot of times when I'm explaining to people, and especially when I've been at conferences or I've been on consulting assignments or training assignments, when people have approached me about it and I explain what I have a lot of people who have said, "Oh, I think I have that too." Like, I think I've got that too. I think that's what I've got as well. And I think hopefully what this really does become for a lot of people is a first proactive, positive step, a safe environment, a safe place where they see names that they recognize, people they see, whether it's recognizing the name directly or being able to recognize the title that's next to it as something that they have familiarity with. And that for a lot of people, I think in this industry will be a first real positive, proactive step towards, getting real solutions or getting a real understanding for what they are and what they struggle with. And I'm excited certainly about the life hacks and a lot of that stuff. And I use a lot of the stuff that I've seen, on Eric's website. But I think, more than anything, I think to have that place that people can come and share their story or read about other people's stories and be able to see themselves in that. I know that's where I've gotten the most out of my experience, is being that sharing my story has allowed people to say, "Oh, I think I have that." And I'm always like, everyone's is really unique. You should really explore it yourself first. But that doesn't happen without connecting to a story or connecting to a conversation first.
And the disclaimers all the time, right? That the three of us are not therapists. We're
Yes.
peer-to-peer helpers. The last session that we had a Dr. Pleener, who's the head of our Integrative Psychiatry Alliance. And so, we'll continue to bring on this podcast and on Sports Business Solutions, different experts to the table to help people. So it's not just about peer-to-peer type of advice. But I really, what I love about how both of you are sharing, and Bob saying it was OCD, and then Brett, you saying like people are coming up to me saying I had the same thing. I think the fascinating thing about why mental health people start to connect through it is the events that lead towards something could be very different for each of us. So it could be the loss of a parent, it could be someone losing a job, it could be a divorce, right? It could be any of those things. And it could be genetics, and it could be our lifestyle and the nutrition, the way that we eat. And I'm a firm believer, after studying the science of it and speaking with the experts, that what happens is whatever those situations are, they then end up boiling up into this pot of stress and trauma that exists in our system, and it manifests itself in symptoms that each of us can relate to. Like, even though my diagnosis is an OCD, have I had time, like Bob and I'll joke, because like both of us have critiqued each other's, writing on a post that we're about to put up, like, no, you need a period here. no, a comma should go here. Like, yeah, there's some OCD related to that, but
the grammar on my website must drive you too nuts. I'd be shocked if either of you actually read mine at this point then.
But that, I think that's what, there's some fun to it almost in a way. Now when you're open about it, yeah, it's not that like we're rejoicing in our pain, but it's more like you can give each other a fun, hard time. And one of the things that made me think of, as you were talking, Brett, Bob brought up before, that there's been reps that have come up to him and said, I want to share this with my boss, my manager, my director, my VP, whoever it is. What's the right way to share, right? So like, you think of the nuances of the conversations that are going to be opened up through this type of collaboration that we're all getting involved in. It's not necessarily just the leader, I am mental health, hear me roar, here's my story. It's also going to be the people who say, this is what I did internally to begin to share my story with my boss, or coming from the boss, again, from the top down perspective, here's how I shared a little bit of my vulnerability where I still maintained a position of authority, but I shared enough of that vulnerability to show that I'm a human being, right? And that's what's really exciting, is that there's so much nuance to this as we look at it in industry perspectives in terms of the best ways for us to get the conversations going and to normalize it.
Yeah, for sure. And so it's interesting. I know, we had discussed this a while back, months and months and months ago, And all of a sudden there's kind of an email that got shot out that's like, hey, we're doing this. And I'm sure this moment that we're in right now is a huge reason why this was pulled forward a little bit. But, maybe Bob, starting with you, because obviously your influence is really incredible across this industry. What about this moment makes it really important that this conversation starts in full now?
Yeah, thanks, Brad. And I would say the same to you. I mean, I think, and I really appreciate what you're doing with your group as well. And I think you're having a lot of these conversations and might be having, a lot more than I am too at an individual rep level. And I think what's exciting to me right now is the fact that we can partner on this together. And, with Eric's expertise in this space and with you and I doing similar work, and to try to take this to the masses, because that's really what it's about. But, I think the timing of this, and, Eric and I, together, like we have a great relationship. That's no secret. I mean, as he was a former boss and has been a mentor, and I'm not going to blow too much smoke to Eric, but you got
to at least hold on. The first day I worked at the Suns, Bob wasn't there. He was on his vacation, like the timing of it. And I get this email from Bob that says, "It's really nice to meet you. I greatly desire to manage one day." And I read that the way that I'm thinking of Bob's voice. And so I'm thinking of him as like this sales rep back in the day, in the way that he wrote that. Anyway, I had to share that.
And I'm sure it wasn't. I wish we had that email somewhere in the archives, because I bet it wasn't like that. But, I was a senior seller. Eric was coming in as my boss. I was close to my former boss. And, I made it my goal to try to be Eric's number two. And, fortunately he was able to help me a ton as I grew, but separate stuff. But I think that all of this has led to Eric and I having a good relationship, me having my stuff going on. And I've kind of been in a vacuum with I need to get a handle on my stuff, but I've really admired what Eric's been building. And so we had the conversation months ago, Eric, just about the ideas, and we've always iterated, and he's had an idea and he'll ping me, or vice versa, or I'll jab him on something he's doing or whatever. We'll have that kind of dialogue. And then as it started to intensify a little bit, it was all right, because I think Eric, and you might even, acknowledge this too. I think the idea initially was hey, could we do a partnership where, once a month we put some blog content up and we have an initiative here. And my, Eric, I'm sure you'd agree. My response to you was look, if we're going to do this, let's do it right. And what I mean by that is let's not just say, hey, this is going to be a 6-month thing to get some content out. Let's figure out, how does this thing live beyond both of us, right? And I think it needs to be recurring. I think it needs to be more formal. I think it needs to be, people need to know that it's here to stay, because I think if it had been kind of done half-heartedly, I think it could hurt us even more, that it's fact that it's not a priority or that it's not here to stay. And so I kind of pushed Eric and I said, look, we can do this right now, but, give me some time to, think about coding the site, think about, Brett, I'm sure you could agree, I got to set aside some money for development costs to get the coding done the way that I need it. We got to figure out the branding and what does the messaging look like. And it started with an idea and it sort of intensified into hey, this is going to be, if we're going to do it, let's do it together and let's do this for the industry. And so that it just takes a long time to do that. And so once we got it to a point where, Eric and I putting our heads together around one singular vision was not easy, and we definitely went back and forth a lot, and he alluded to it already. But, once we got it to the point where all right, I think we're here, creative's right, it's synced in the site, it's in the test environment, functionality was working, then it was just around all right, when are we going to launch this? And what's the right time to launch it? And then all of a sudden COVID hit, and we were going to push it further out. And Eric, I think you had some events coming up where we were hey, do we sync it with one of these events? And then COVID came and a lot of our worlds got flipped upside down. And then it was hey, I think people are concerned, they're worried, they're uncertain about the future. And I think they need this right now more than ever. So let's just move this up. Let's get it out to the world. Even if we don't have all of the content ready to launch maybe right now, let's just sort of get this out there, tell people it's coming, and start to build as we go. And that's what we decided to do, just because we thought it was important given the times that we're in.
Yeah, I'll add, only because it loops Brett now into the conversation about the stuff that you and I were talking about, Brett, before we got on the call, when you were talking about sharing some of the things that we go through with your wife, right? And so what's interesting about launching now in a COVID era is that let's forget COVID for a second, and let's talk about people who deal with mental health challenges. And the previous comment that I made about how it doesn't matter what the impetus is, we end up with similar symptoms oftentimes. So those of us who faced further down end of the spectrum symptoms on mental health, we've dealt with things like I'll name a term that some people might not be as familiar with, but like anhedonia, where it's like this complete flatlining of emotions, where you can't get up and excited about your team that's coming on TV or a movie that you're getting excited to see, or going out to dinner with your wife or husband or whatever it is. And so for those of us who've already felt that from a symptomatic standpoint, where our wiring in our brain has gone there, or chemically it's gone there, whatever all the different theories are of why that happens, we've lived in a period like this of uncertainty well before COVID ever happened. Now you add COVID into the mix, and we're talking about the whole industry now, and or the whole world, but I think in the context of this conversation, the whole industry, and you say situationally what people are going through with their goals being taken away, their responsibilities not being as much as they were before, not knowing when games are starting, all these things, that ability to focus on the what is my purpose, what is my interest, what is my identity stuff starts to come about to everyone. And everyone starts to feel what people have mental health further end of the spectrum type of symptoms have, they're feeling it situationally. And so right now is the most important time, if anything, to talk about it, because one, we could help people, but two, I think it brings up the whole collective conversation overall, because now, like the conversation you had with your wife, Brett, we could turn to people who haven't gotten to that place and say, see how difficult this is? This is a daily thing for me, or a weekly thing for me, or however often it happens for those of us who live like this. And so now you can appreciate that, but also this is why I want you to be proactive with your mental health, so you don't ever have to feel this when COVID ends. And I think that's the fascinating part about the timing.
Well, so people, I mean, I think people would say that I have a pretty aggressive sales training style to begin with. But I've had people comment that, wow, Brett, it seems like you've taken this up to an 11 or a 12 since this began. And I tell everyone, I know what happens if you just sit. Like, I know what happens if you don't take any activity. I know what happens if you wait for your management team to create a clear understanding of what they're going to do in this crisis. Like, I know what it feels like to Eric. I know what it feels like to sit in that moment, and nothing good happens if we don't become positive and proactive. And there's going to be a lot of people who walk out of this, and that's, I keep saying, it's either an opportunity or an excuse, because there's going to be a lot of people who walk out of this with a level of anxiety that they've never felt. There's going to be anxiety getting back to the office. There's going to be anxiety being home. They're going to be surrounded by it and engulfed by it if they're not taking a lot of these proactive, positive steps right now, which I think is important. And to touch on something that Bob said, you know, I want to give Bob a lot of credit on this too. You know, Bob and I had a tough conversation when this started and when this was going on.
Yeah.
And because this is a very important topic to me, that it was going to be dealt with and done the right way. And so something that he said really resonated was just doing this the right way, and doing this at a scale and a level of importance that mirrored this instance there. And so I always need to make sure I give Bob credit on that, because it was not an easy conversation between the two of us, given my passion for this subject. But once I was able to really hear Bob out, it was very clear that doing this the right way is obviously, and not one off and not here or there, and not as an effort to bring people in a way that's disingenuous, but doing it to that level of scale was where Bob and I, you know, got very in sync on this, for sure.
No, I appreciate you sharing that, Brett. And it was a difficult conversation. And I think from an outsider perspective, I think it was important for you to understand sort of my why behind doing this. And I think until that point, I had never shared with you, you know, that this has affected me personally. You know, like I wasn't as public at that point about my struggles as you were. And so I think, you know, some people might have looked at this as like, all right, well, why is Bob doing this? Why is it in the clubhouse? What does this all mean? And, you know, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to tell you, you know, that I was in it for those right reasons, and that I was in it because I wanted to make an impact. And I do have a passion to tell this story, and I hadn't been out there as publicly at that time. And so now the more this I'm doing, I've doubled down that, like, this is definitely what I want to do and what I want to do more of. And, you know, I'm fortunate that Eric's been here to sort of like help us sort of craft all that and get it into a message that can be scaled, because that's what he's done. He's done great in creating a movement with Same Here. And so, but I appreciated that dialogue, Brett, and, you know, us being able to hash it out, and you getting behind what we're doing, although it lives on my side, and supporting, you know, some of those things. Like, I always look at, like, it's not my side, it's really our site as an industry and our site as an alliance. And I'm just sort of the aggregator of it. And so, it means a lot that you were, willing to get behind us and doing that and being a part of what we're building. Even though that first conversation was spirited, and I understood where you were coming from, and I thought it was important for us to talk it out. So I'm glad we did.
What's really interesting, and I think this circles everything back in, is like 7 or 8 years ago, I don't know I would have been able to have that conversation. I probably would have just sat back and stewed for fear of, well, what if I have that conversation? What happens if I go out? And I think part of having positively addressed the challenges that I've had allows me to have more and more of those conversations and dialogues, and allows me to be proactive in a way right now that historically I probably wouldn't have been close. I would have been one of those people that sat back and took it. And I think that's hopefully the end result for a lot of people.
What's interesting, I'm hearing you guys talk, and it's given me butterflies in a weird way. I know it's gonna kind of give people weird.
It's weird. You should have came up with another
word in front of me right now. But so when the idea of forming Same Here was that the way that stories get shared by our media is they treat people like they're a piece of meat. And you hear the story, and then that athlete or that celebrity is forgotten about after they've shared for 2 weeks, and they're the hot thing. And it's like, who's the next person we could take advantage of? And, the way that you guys are talking about it, I just think that there's this opportunity to continue from an alliance. That's what we always talk about, is building alliances. And the fact that you guys have brought your two companies together to work on this together in a way, to me, shows, it reflects on what you're talking about, Brett, that, a number of years ago, you might not have had this conversation. Hopefully that's a lesson to anyone that's working in any space. I think the market that you have for the people that you can affect is greater when you hold hands with people, even if they're, quote, a competitor. There's ways to lift the level for everyone. In the space of mental health, I think it's a no-brainer, because if my hypothesis is correct, this is a message that 7 billion people need to hear. Well, good luck to the three of us, even if we have the most fleshed out businesses in the world, for reaching all 7 billion of those people. It's not going to happen. So when I look at people doing things in the mental health space, being like, this is what we do, and we can't share because we've got people who make donations to us, and we've got sponsors. I think of it, I'm like, we're thinking such a narrow way. And I appreciate the two of you for coming together on it. Now, in the context, and I'll say something that I haven't said to you both, and I'm saying it for the first time in a public way, but the opportunity and the market that's out there to help the number of sports business executives who need help with this, because once we break down that wall and explain to everyone that this is life and this is not this thing called just mental illness, there's ample opportunity for both of your companies to thrive even in this space within the sports industry, and help many people. You're each going to have individual conversations. You're each going to have group conversations. You're going to be on the road because we've had these talks. People are going to lean on you and be like, hey, Bob, hey, Brett, I want to have this conversation with you. Or, hey, collectively in the group, in front of everyone here, can we talk about how you're able to open this conversation in a broader way? That's a beautiful piece about this. And I think both of your businesses will prosper because of it. And I'm not saying that because I'm the beneficiary of having two awesome people come together on this. I'm saying it because I've seen it in so many other industries, that when you hold hands, that's what raises the level of the conversation.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brett.
Go ahead, Bob.
I don't know. I got distracted with Eric saying butterflies and holding hands. I didn't know where we were, but I agree totally. And I thought it might be cool one day, maybe Brett and I are even doing like a joint events, or maybe it's like we're both sharing, not that this is about us, it's about really this whole alliance. But I think people look at our businesses as competing, and we are, Brett, and for a lot of the things that we do. But I think to Eric's point, if we do this together, holding hands, using that terminology, I think it's going to open up a lot of opportunities for us. But I also, and Brett I'm sure would agree that, I think it's just going to happen organically, but that's not the genesis or the reasoning for doing this. But I think what will happen here, and not just for us, but for a lot of people that tell their stories, is they're going to be more open, and they're going to get more in return, people just wanting to connect with those individuals. The same way Brett has said, after he told his story, people come up to him at trainings and come up to him at events and say, hey, I struggle with that too. And it's going to connect him and I probably to a lot more people that we wouldn't ordinarily talk to, which I think is great. Go ahead, Brett.
I was just gonna say, I think I appreciate that, Eric, and I don't disagree with it if we're being fully honest. But I think what's been interesting for me, going back now a while in sports is, understanding, a lot of, and driven by a lot of my anxiety, making a lot of poor decisions and poor choices because I thought it was the right thing to do to help my career and my business. What I've learned along the way is if you just do the right thing by people, eventually that becomes the most ultimate opportunity to get rewards and recognition and to earn business and to do the rest of it. And that's, I think to me, and that wasn't even something I think I understood the first time, when I did, get after it sales for the first time. I think that really was the genesis of leading with empowerment of a salesperson. The second time was, I was going out, I was winning business, but I didn't love my message. I thought a lot of my training was being written for managers, not necessarily sales reps. I thought a lot of the ways that I went out and competed for business, they weren't always the greatest reflection of who I am. And I can say proudly that, monetarily, but I would say more personally, this iteration through empowerment of a salesperson, and now, combining on this, I think this is a much better reflection of, who I want to be. And I think, people follow that. I think doing the right thing, which this is, that always ultimately is the best way to win business, both from a larger economic standpoint, but I think also from how you feel personally when it gets there.
Yeah,
And
no, I go ahead, Eric.
no, we'll save it for the next time we all get together. It's another kumbaya message, but what I've noticed is, so there's two types of people when you look at this space, and I know that's a very macro, simple way to look at it, but there's the people who do this because they can help people and affect people's lives, and there's people who do this because in helping and affect people's lives, they see there's a entrepreneurial aspect to it. I like working with the people who are in category A, who are genuinely driven by it, and then success follows when you do something that's good for the world because you're passionate about helping people. And so when I'm teasing a little bit that we'll talk about this on the next call, I can't tell you how many weird serendipitous things have happened over this 2.5 year span that we've been doing it, where like this recording artist, their song was called "We're All a Little Crazy," and somehow we got like connected somehow through this random person, and like all these different things that just start coming together when you just start putting your message out there and you make it because you want to help people, not because you're trying to protect your little space. I think the world really does reward you. Maybe that's a spiritual message, maybe that's a religious message to some people. I don't know. I don't mean it targeted towards any one particular group. I mean that just generally, that someone who maybe didn't understand how the world all fits together in one big picture as much before I went through this and was so career focused, I've learned that along the way, that like just keep putting it out there, keep helping people, and the universe will reward you back.
Yeah. Hey, Brett, just with the remaining time we have, I know we only have 8 to 10 minutes, but could maybe each of us talk about, I've already sort of talked about the different ways people can contribute and be a part of this, because I don't want it to feel like, hey, it's like these guys are creating all this content. We really want people in the industry to bring issues to the forefront, that it's important to us that we've done it anonymously. Yep. So by going to the site, and Brett, I don't know if you're going to accompany this with like a link to the site or within your stuff, but
Absolutely.
What we'd really love is a call, not to make this, a call to action, but we'd love for people to go to the site and go to the discussion board and message in something that you want to talk about, because we really want to do content here that is relevant to you. And we want to help. And I think from us, we're going to do our best to curate that. But, I think it's going to be more powerful, Brett, I'm sure you would agree, as you talk to reps at an individual level. And you even have said, Brett, there's sometimes a disconnect between the leaders that maybe we talk to and then what's happening on their teams. And so, I thought we could maybe spend a couple minutes around, like, just hopefully for the people that listen to this, we want them to join this alliance that Eric talked about and to be a part of this movement. And really, for every one person that tells their story in a public way, it's going to make it easier for the person after that. And to the point where, in 2, 5, 10 years, there might be 100, 200, 500 people that have shared their stories to where it's not even that much of a thing. People just, share their story and it's just a more normal thing. But maybe talk about, for each of you, like the response you got and how it felt when you actually started to talk about these things, because I've shared publicly now on a couple podcasts, a couple webinars, and in my blog that I've had OCD for the better part of half my life and have struggled really bad at times. And I only told my parents like 8 months ago. So like they didn't even know. And I think I was embarrassed to talk about it. I was shameful to talk about it, or ashamed to talk about it. You know, Eric and I, as close as we are, he didn't really know. I mean, he knew some of my OCD and would kind of jab me, but he had no idea the hours that I would spend ruminating on these unwanted thoughts and things that just negatively affected my life. And so, you know, I found in writing my story and talking about it, it's not only connecting me to more people, but it's helping me a lot. It's you know, I don't know the right term for it, but like just getting it out there, I think could really help a lot of people. So it definitely did for me. But, you know, Eric, I know that your message was so overwhelming when you heard it in response, you sort of launched and made this your mission for your life, you know? So maybe talk about yours. And Brett, I'd love to hear maybe the response that you got.
Yeah.
And hopefully you guys are with me in that, you know, I want, whether you're a inside salesperson and you just started, you're a marketing intern at a team, or you're the team president, like I want everyone to feel comfortable that we're all human and we're all looked at on equal footing here, because I want everyone to participate in that way. And I, you know, hopefully you guys are on board with that too.
Yeah, sure. I'll try to be quick.
Yeah.
So when I shared on LinkedIn, I think I've shared the number. I got 400 calls in about a 2-day period. I had to keep erasing my voicemail box. And I share that number only because I had no idea who any of these people were. They were from as far as China. And what that shows is, now granted, this was a time period when no one was sharing, so people were probably reaching out, trying to get help any way they could, but no one was sharing a disorder that they had been through or a label that they had been given. Everyone was sharing a life experience they had been through. So the spectrum was everything from losing a child to sudden infant death syndrome to talk about ruminations, Bob. There was a young woman, 32, said, I'm married to a handsome husband with 2 beautiful kids, white picket fence, and I broke up with my college boyfriend at age 22 after we dated for 4 years, and I wake up with this pit in my stomach every single day, wondering if I'm with the right person. Did I pick the right soulmate for myself, right? And that's real, right? That's real stuff. And I'm not saying that woman has dealt with it properly. Maybe she should have been talking about this with someone professional, but now it's 10 years later, and she's sharing how these things have built up inside of her. And so to me, you know, there is nothing more powerful. I think we all talk about that we got into sports for the reasons that we loved sports, right? But then when you break it down and you look at what we're all doing right now, really what we loved about sports is we loved helping people, right? Like you take sports out of it for a second, every single day that we came into the office, or what we do right now, where we get the biggest buzz is from a rep coming up to us, or all the way up to a team president coming up to us and saying, that really helped me. That's what gives us our fuel to keep going. And that's what's exciting. And so when you share, a couple things happen. One, your ability to take the heavy bag off of yourself and just drop it and not allow it to be so heavy. I think Bob experienced that when he shared. I'm sure when Brett shares his story, he's going to say that too. The bag isn't as heavy. Second thing is, you could be changing or saving someone else's life. I get emails still to this day, this is now 2.5 years later, from people in the sports industry specifically, okay, keeping it anonymous, who say, I finally just now went to a therapist, but 2.5 years ago, reading your story, that's what made me go down the path of thinking about doing it. And I'm like, I can't believe it took 2.5 years, but how amazing that, like, that was the impetus for that person to start thinking about it, right? One thing I'll add to Bob's is just that sharing doesn't necessarily, back to your point about the message board, Bob, sharing doesn't necessarily mean you have to share your whole story. And it doesn't mean you have to be public about it. Right. So by that message board, the beautiful thing is you could go on there completely anonymously, and your topic could be something like, you know, competing with other sales reps next to me and how difficult that is. And just write that alone, right? Emotionally, how difficult it is to be a collaborator, but also a competitor with the people that are next to me. Your topic could be, you know, my pet passed away, and I know it sounds a simple thing, but people are going to laugh at me if I come in the office. I remember I had a guy in New Jersey with the Devils who his pet ran away. Christian Hurd, shout out to him back in the day. And like, he was distraught. And some people in the office were making fun of him that like he was making this big deal about his dog that had ran away. But that's a big deal to people, right? And so sharing what you're going through is just as important of a share as sharing your full story, and sharing anonymously is just as helpful to people as sharing in a public way. So please don't feel obligated that it has to all come out there all at once and that's the only time. The reason this board was created that way is so that we can start to unravel all the stuff we're dealing with in all the different ways we're comfortable at it.
Yeah, and if you do want to tell your story in a more public way, you can message us offline and we can talk about, working on a piece together. But to Eric's point, yeah, if you want to just go right to the discussion board, all that can be anonymous. Sorry, Brett, didn't mean to hop in there.
Oh, no, absolutely. I was going to say, I think, like I said, hitting send on that, someone with anxiety was a 3 to 4 month process. I mean, that was pretty well written for a while. I would say to some, my wife and other people that I was talking to about it, my parents, my family, who like Bob didn't really know in a lot of ways. I said, if one person likes this, then, but if we're going to be full disclosure, if like literally one person liked it, I would have been like, God damn it. But like the response was genuinely overwhelming. I think, like Eric, I didn't put my phone number on it, but I had a ton of people, like I had just as many people send me a LinkedIn message as they did like the LinkedIn message. I've had my favorite responses, aren't necessarily like people in sports who may feel a little intimidated to like that article for fear that if someone saw that they liked an article like this, how it would do. But like, I know we talked about this quick, but the amount of people that I've either been in a one-on-one conversation with or at a conference with pulling me aside, like the amount of people that have said, thank you, was as someone who has an addictive personality, that was addicting. Like it was addicting to hear individually from people that I have a lot of respect for, whether they be AEs all the way up to presidents of organizations, to hear that made some sort of impact or made them do some sort of self-reflection was humbling and really cool and just so deeply gratifying in a way that I had never experienced with any amount of sales training or development that I had ever done personally, because this was going to affect every aspect of their lives. And again, that's a big part of the reason that I joined this again is I can't every 2 years announce on LinkedIn that I have anxiety, but to be able to stay in front of it in a way that allows people to see my face and hopefully understand that if someone like Bob or someone like Eric or someone like Brett can be in front of this, whether it starts anonymously or ends up being with your name on it, that you can feel free to share your story. And if we get people that start to do that anonymously, publicly, that's going to have a tremendous impact, whether they be inside sales reps. And I think this is just a really important one to end on. There's 4 out of 5 great people who don't have the mental health struggles, but interact with people all the time who do. We want to be able to help the manager who may not struggle with mental health, but wants to create a safe environment for their inside sales rep who's terrified to share that story for fear of how that's going to reflect on them from a managerial standpoint. And so hopefully this is not just a great place to share stories, but it's a great place for people who don't necessarily struggle with it to come to be able to get some perspective and understanding about what the people they're sitting next to or the people they're leading, what they can feel in that situation.
Love it.
Yeah, this is good stuff, Brett. I appreciate you having us on. And
yeah, absolutely. Listen, we'll link to it.
Doing more of this.
Yeah, no doubt. We'll link to it. We'll be around for it. I really appreciate you guys coming on. Hopefully this can drive a lot of the people that are, pretty consistent to my site over to your space. So enjoy your day. And we'll be talking very soon.
All right. Look forward to it. Thanks, Brett.
Thanks, guys.